Good morning and welcome to Feasting on Faith with Sheila. I hope you are as excited about lesson number 2 in our series of Ruth as I am. It is a wonderful lesson. You know, in lesson 1, we stood beside Ruth when she made the surrender to follow Naomi and to follow Naomi's God Jehovah and leave everything in Moab that she knew was familiar, her family, the gods that she worshiped, her life, her home, everything there. She stepped out on faith to follow Naomi because Naomi followed God. What a wonderful thing that was for Ruth and for Naomi. She trusted God and she trusted the one that Naomi trusted. You know, when her and Naomi arrived in Bethlehem, they had nowhere to go. There was no home. There was no job. There was no husband, no sons, no one to watch out and provide for them. They were on their own. That it would be a hard thing even in today's society to go into a different city or a different land and make provision for yourself. But this is when Ruth decided that she told Naomi, let me go into the field and glean ears of grain so she could at least provide something to eat for her and Naomi. You know, gleaning was hard work back then, back-breaking. You had to lean over all the time and pick up the little bitty ears of corn or the grain that had fallen to the ground from the harvesters. And that was a job for the poor and the vulnerable, those people that were overlooked. That was the job that they had to do. And she went willingly. She didn't know if there would be enough for her. She wasn't sure if she could ever even trust the ones that were gleaning with her. But she stepped out in faith, following God and Jehovah. But she stepped out knowing that she had to. This was something she had to do. You know, faith does not require seeing the outcome. Faith requires trusting the Father. You know, Ruth didn't know what God was arranging behind the scenes. She was simply being faithful in this little step that she was taking for her and Naomi. But you know, God was already positioning her for her provision, for her protection, and her redemption. God had already walked out into the field to provide for them. You know, I'm sure she woke up that morning and she was fearful because she didn't know if she would even find kindness behind those harvesters. She didn't know if she would bring home enough for them to eat, but she stepped out in faith. To her field that day she went, and just another day of survival was all she could think about, one step at a time into the uncertainty. But something different, something was there that was telling her and drawing her and having her go in faith. And she thought she was walking into that field alone, but God was already positioning her. He was leading her. He was watching her. She stepped into the field of Boaz. And this is the very man that God used to change her future and bring about the future generations of Christ. How amazing is that? This is how God often works. He doesn't show you the whole picture at one time. He leads you step by step, and you've got to be willing to start those steps. God was already in the timing. He was already in the provision, and he was already having his eye on her. And through Boaz, then he provided for her and Naomi, because in the beginning, he goes before them and he prepared Boaz's mind. And when Boaz saw Ruth, he knew she was different, because I would say that she still dressed as a Moabite. She probably couldn't afford clothing like we do today. So he could tell she was a Jew. So he knew she was different. So he asked his harvesters, who is this woman? And they told him who she was and that she had followed the old woman Naomi from Moab. And he checked around and found out that she was kin to him distantly. And so he told his harvesters, you know, be good to her. Make sure she has provision. Make sure she has water. And he said, even let good grain fall on purpose so that she can pick it up and provide for her and for Naomi. Is that not a wonderful thing? He went above and beyond his responsibility, and he did extra and above because of Naomi. See, God already knows what's in your future. He knows where you are headed, and he's already watching. He's already providing. He's already working, and he's putting intentional provision out for you, for your future. And sometimes in our lives, what looks like a coincidence is actually his provision being dropped on us. Moments when strength comes when you have just had all you can take. Sometimes when that extra little bit of help comes your way, and you've really learned that I've got enough. I have everything that I need. That's God working in your life. It arrives unexpectedly, and we realize that we have had a God moment. The father was not just watching out for Ruth, but he was actively preparing for her and Naomi. Ruth, from that point forward, was under God's wings. She was no longer alone. She was no longer forgotten, because God had saw her, and as we learned in Ephesians, he had accepted her. Is that not wonderful? That is so important, because when you're walking through a problem, you're walking through a loss, a mistake, just normal everyday occurrences in your life, sometimes you feel invisible and that you don't count for anything. But just as God put Boaz in Ruth's path, God is watching out for you. He chose to provide for Naomi through Ruth. And God does not just provide for us, he provides through us to others. And that's why it's so important to help others with a kind word, a kind deed. We can provide for others just like Boaz provided for Ruth. I'm sure Ruth felt weak sometimes, but she was carrying the answer to Naomi's emptiness. And sometimes when we feel the most broken, God is still using us as vessels of his provision. Can you imagine how Naomi felt standing in the doorway the day that Ruth had to go to the field, knowing that she was going so she could provide food for Naomi? Naomi couldn't go. She was too old. She was not able to bend over and do the kind of work that Ruth was going to have to do. But she knew that she could not provide for them. She knew Ruth was their only answer. Naomi but wasn't the only one watching, because God, Jehovah, was also watching. And Naomi had faith in God, and she began to pray. And with every step that Ruth took, God saw her. Every feeling of being broken and being alone, and every weakness that she had, God would give her strength. When her back would begin to break after hours in the hot sun picking up little pieces of grain, God would give her strength. He would strengthen her. And she was never alone in the field. We have to understand, he was always present. He's always watching, and he was very attentive to her. But Ruth didn't know yet the full story that was going to happen with her life and her future. But yet she knew that she trusted the God of Naomi, and God was watching out for her, and knew that each day when she walked home that her and Naomi had enough to eat, and they had enough provision. Is that not wonderful? She didn't know at the time that Boaz was doing that, but she knew that God, Jehovah, was providing for her. Before God reveals his full plans in your life, he reveals his faithfulness to you. And we can trust him because he sees us and he is near. Ruth thought that she was just gathering grain, but yet she was standing in the field, and her father was watching over her. and he was providing for her. She thought she was just walking still in her loss and still in her grief and her widow and still sorrowful, but yet she knew God was providing. And the Father was walking with her just like he does us when we are walking with him. She's not alone because God was always there, just as he is with us and leading us and guiding us. And let's end this one today in prayer. And I hope that it has helped you. Lord, thank you for being the God who goes before us. When we walk into uncertain places like Ruth, remind us that you are already there. Help us trust you, even when we cannot see the full picture. Let every heart here know that they are seen and loved and provided for by you. And remind us that you never leave your children alone. You always have your eye on them, and you are always providing for them and their future. And just like Ruth, you are always in the picture and have never left them alone. Amen. I hope you have enjoyed today. And come back next week for lesson number 3, and it's going to be another good one. Love you. Bye-bye.